Hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting game from round 5 of the 2022 Tata Steel Masters. It's Richard Rapport versus Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa, and it really shows how one move can make all the difference, as you'll see in this game. Let's check it out. Rapport with the white pieces opens with d4. Sorry about that. We have knight to f6 by Pragu, c4, we have e6, knight to c3, and bishop to b4. So already a very exciting Nimzo Indian defense is on the board. Sorry about that. We have queen to c2, going for the classical line. This is the most popular move. Queen to c2 and the e3 are amongst the most popular. We have castles, and now a3, challenging the bishop on b4. We have bishop captures on c3, and now as you've developed the queen to c2, you don't have to mess up your pawn structure. You can recapture with the queen. And now b6 is, again, by far the most popular. You want to get the bishop over to this long diagonal, but Pragu goes for the immediate d5. So here, bishop to g5, putting pressure on the knight, so the knight can't move now, and now c5. So again, incredibly sharp, offering this pawn to get some very nice counterplay with pawn to d4. So Rapport accepts this with d captures on c5 and d4 now. Attacking the queen, we have queen all the way to g3. Here you could make a lot of queen retreats, queen to f3, queen to g3. You could play queen to c2, queen pretty much anywhere. Queen to g3 is what Rapport goes for, and now knight b to d7. You have to be very careful. If your queen ever moves from the defense of the knight, it's pretty much game over, so we have to add another defender to the knight here, and now knight to f3. Continuing development, we have e5 now, offering this pawn, well, the position has been reached before. Knight captures on e5 is a known move. For example, if knight captures e5, knight captures on c5, the game just continues. Also, e3 is a known move, challenging black's strong setup here in the center, but Rapport just plays rook to d1, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So how can Pragu continue here? He plays rook to e8, adds more support to the knight. Now e4 is, well, one of the ideas. And Rapport just boldly defends the c5 pawn. He plays b4 and says, I can keep my king in the center. The king is safe on e1, and I will defend my extra pawn. So now he's up a pawn, and Pragu has to prove that, well, the pawn sacrifice was worth it. So here he strikes at the pawn chain with a5. He wants to play a captures on b4, and now knight to d2, getting more control over this e4 square. So knight to e4 will put a lot of pressure on this knight here. A captures on b4, we have a captures, and now how do you continue with black? Well, you should continue with pawn to e4. Definitely makes sense. Now the knight can come to e4, the rook defends this, and it's just a tough position for white to handle. But I guess the pressure was too much for Pragu with the constant worry about moves like bishop here, so he played king to f8. Now he doesn't have to worry about such things anymore, but he also misses his opportunity to advance those pawns. So here we have queen to b3, and the queen to b3 is a move that well, it is hard to understand. For one, you don't really expect to play g3 and bishop to g2, because if g3, then we can just play h6, and then white has to give up the bishop, because if you go h4, g5 traps the bishop. There's a pawn on g3. Another thing is, okay, maybe if the pawns really advance forward, maybe Rapport saw all of this, and maybe he's planning to put a queen on this diagonal to just control it. So that might be the idea behind queen to b3. But other than this, it's not very easy to understand the move. So here h6, we have bishop back to h4, and now pawn to e4. Sorry, pawn to e4 by black, grabbing a lot of space here. And now, of course, like we said, g3, g5 just traps the bishop. So here we have e3, and now Pragu has to really be precise with his moves here. He advances the pawn to d3, and who wouldn't? It's such a pleasant move to make. You completely stifle white. You say, okay, you're not moving anything here. You can't develop develop the bishop. How are you ever developing anything here if you ever play g3, just g5 traps the bishop? So this must be good for black. However, knight to e5 was much stronger, because now white is really without any moves. There's nothing you can play here, and if you try something like knight captures on e4 as the knight is pinned, we just play g5. We unpin, and after, let's say, knight d6 going after the rook, we can just capture on h4. For example, knight captures, queen captures, but this will be much better for black. So it seems that this is the moment where you don't go forward, where you just prepare. You play knight to e5, you still give white a move, and d3 is always an option. But okay, d3 was played, and now we have h3. We have g5 attacking the bishop, bishop to g3, and knight to e5. But now it's a little bit different, because now queen to b2, and what we've discussed, now the queen controls this diagonal, and it's not so pleasant. The knight here is hanging now. So queen to e7, Praggnanandhaa defends, and now rook to a1. Attacking the undefended rook on a8. So here Praggnanandhaa captures, we have rook captures, queen captures, and now bishop to f5, continuing development. But now bishop captures on e5. And here you see that white's problem no longer exists, because white's biggest issue with the position was that he doesn't have moves, and there are still so many pieces on the board. The queens are on the board, black is attacking, white should get crushed. However, here he just allowed Rapport to trade off everything. Bishop captures, queen captures, rook captures, and now he plays g4. We have bishop to g6, and now bishop to g2, and now he can even castle and get the rook into the game. Or even push the f-pawn, play king f2. There are many ideas. You can move the knight, play king to d2. All depends on what black plays. So here, black wants to make use of the only open file on the board, that is the a file, and he plays rook to e8. He wants to play rook to a8 and try and do some damage here. So here, knight to b1, making room for the king. Now comes knight to d7. We have king to d2. Now comes rook to a8. And here, just king to c3. Now, the real question is, how do you deal with rook to a2? Because black will go after the f2 pawn, and white's biggest advantage is that he is up a pawn. But it would seem that that's not white's only advantage. White's other advantage is the extremely active king and the 3-to-1 advantage, pawn-wise on the queen side. So here we have rook to a2 going after the pawn, but white just plays rook to d1. He says, all right, you can have your pawn, I don't really mind. So rook captures on f2 was played. Now comes rook to d2, defending the bishop and offering a rook trade. And now, of course, Praggnanandhaa doesn't want to trade rooks, as those pawns are incredibly scary, so he keeps the rooks on the board. And now king to d4. You have to be very active with the king. We have rook to e6, adding a defender to the e4 pawn. And now knight to c3. Just putting more pieces into the center of the board. And now we have knight to f6. Interestingly, if you try knight to b8 to go for some sort of a knight to c6 check, because it really does seem like you could maybe checkmate the white king, just b5, and we don't really care about that knight on b8 anymore. So after knight to c3, knight to f6 was played, adding another defender here, and now just b5. And now, black has to be very careful. We are creating a pass pawn at some point. King to g7, now comes rook to a2. Now we're hoping to even pick up this pawn. So here h5, we have g captures on h5, and now bishop to f5. Still keeping an eye on this pawn, and white's doubled pawns on the h file will be less of an issue now. So rook to b2, preparing to play c6 now, and if b captures on c6, just start advancing our pass pawn, because we already have a rook here. If you go rook to a7, it's also possible. I mean, it should be winning. There shouldn't be anything black can do about this, but this is also a viable plan. So king to h6, blocking the pawn, now also preparing to capture it, and now rook to f2, attacking the undefended bishop, bishop to h7, and now comes knight to d5. Also, interestingly, rook captures on f6 is also winning. White is so active with the king that pretty much any move in the position is winning. For example, captures, we're going to play captures, and you're just much better now. Rook e6, king captures on d3. You have so much more pressure, it's impossible for black to handle everything. So after bishop to h7, we have knight to d5, and now knight captures on h5. We have rook captures on f7, and now the very tricky pawn to d2. Now Prague is threatening pawn to d1, and there is only one good way to prevent pawn to d1. And even feel free to pause the video here and try to figure out how would you do it while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on always moving the knight back. Knight to c3 is the correct idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, yeah, knight to c3. But for those of you who found rook to f1, that's a terrible move because black just plays knight to g3, attacks your rook, and once you move the rook, knight to e2 is checkmate. That's very unfortunate. The knight blocks the c3 square, this is blocked by the pawn, this is blocked by the rook, and you just got checkmated. So after knight g3, you're not going to be able to move the rook, you're going to have to play something else and give up that rook, and black will just win the game. So knight to c3 is in fact the only winning continuation for white. We have knight to g3 now, again hoping for some tricks here. For example, if rook captures on b7, we can play knight to e2 check, and now you either move the king and lose the knight, or you capture the knight and black gets a queen into the game. So again, you have to be very careful. Rapport plays a knight to d1. This is again the absolute best. Knight to e2 check, and now king to d5, advancing even further, attacking the rook, rook to e8, and now king to d6. Very, very impressive king activity. We have bishop to g6, attacking the rook, just rook to d7. Knight to f4 now, attacking the bishop, asking what do you do with the bishop, and well, Rapport just doesn't care. He plays king to c7. He wants to grab this pawn and then advance his passed pawns. The bishop isn't all that important. So here, knight captures on g2 is played. You really don't have anything better. Now rook captures on d2. You remove this passed pawn, so black is really without any counterplay here. Knight to e1, and now king captures on b7. And now those pawns are unstoppable. Knight to d3, c6 is here. Bishop to f5 guarding the queening square, but it doesn't matter. c7, the b pawn will help out as well. Rook to e5 now, and here knight b to d2. Sorry, knight to b2. We have knight to c5 with check, king to c6, and now knight to b3. We have rook to d8 guarding, rook to d8, preparing to queen the pawn, but really just preparing to push the b pawn. Rook to c5 check, king to d6, and now we have g4. Doesn't really do anything, but you have to play something. Bishop captures, now comes b6, and he was in this position on move 56 that Praggnanandhaa resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You can't move the knight because you lose the rook. The rook can't really move. The rook has to keep an eye on this. The bishop is a light square bishop, so nothing to you can do there. The king completely inactive for most of the game, so completely winning for white. Just b7, b8, and that's it. Black can resign. But of course, it was in this position that Prague resigned, and this means that Rapport not only wins the game but also joins the leaders, as these are the standings after 5 rounds of the Tata Still 2022. So the leader. Sorry, I believe these are the old rankings for some reason. Let me just check. What? Oh, okay, I must have saved it somewhere else. Let me just fix this real quickly. Yeah, I saved it to a different folder. Silly me. All right. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so these are the new standings. So as you can see, with 3.5 points, we have Mamedyarov, Vidit, and Rapport. So currently in the lead. Then with 3 points, Yesipenko and Carlsen. With 2.5 points, Jan Krzysztof Duda, Fabiano Caruana, and Van Forest. With 2 points, Giri, Dubov, Shankland, Karyakin, and Pragu here. And Nils Gandelius still on 1 point with the two draws he got. One against Magnus Carlsen, the game that we've shown yesterday. So if you see who's playing in the tournament, names like Giri, Dubov, Karyakin, Caruana, I mean, those are Carlsen, and those are incredible names, but none of them are leading. Leading players are Mamedyarov, Vidit, and Rapport. So it's a crazy tournament. Anything can happen, and anyone can win, as we've seen last year when Van Forest won the entire event. So yeah, that's the game. Those were the standings. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Really impressive game, and it really shows how, for example, here this was really crazy where this d3 move was played. So just 95, and the white is really without a move. It's very difficult to parry all the threats that black has. But once you advance this pawn, and it seems like such a crushing, stifling idea, you actually help white develop. So unfortunately for Pragu, that's how chess sometimes works. When you have a position like this, don't just rush with a move like pawn to d3. Consider other moves as well. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank Matthew Valdez, Mohan Chudalandi, Malaki Hevehen, Ron Swanson, and Tom Earl for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this spectacular event until it finishes. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.